So, it's official. I have epilepsy.
Yes, specifically, you have juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. It's pretty common within kids your age.
I mean, how can we be certain that I have it? I mean, I know I took all the tests for it, but how do you go on about diagnosing something like this?
That's a good question. Diagnosing JME really just involves, looking at your history, symptoms, and test results. I can walk you through it. It's not very complicated. So first, we start with, your history. You mentioned you have, these sudden jerks or spasms in your arms, sometimes your legs in the mornings, which, those are the symptoms we're actually looking for when we diagnose JME or epilepsy in general. You also described that this has been happening for a few months, and it just worsens when you are tired or really stressed. Next, we did an EEG, which essentially just measures the electrical activity in your brain. And your test showed something called generalized spike wave discharges, which are just specific patterns we see in people with JME. It's just like your brain sending out bursts, like these sudden bursts of like electrical activity, which match your type of seizures you've been having. So an example of an EEG would be something like this. So this is what a normal EEG would look like. Very consistent waves. Yours, here we see these abnormalities where you're experiencing your seizures. And that's essentially what we look for when we do this test. We did an MRI and your results came out, normal, your brain's healthy. It's really what we expect. JME isn't really caused by any physical damage. The problem lies more in how the neurons communicate.
So this isn't due to the head injury I received when my car tumbled off the highway?
JME is genetic. Head trauma can bring symptoms to light and or trigger seizures in general, but the condition itself isn't really caused by trauma like that.
Genetic? Does that mean everyone in my family has it?
It is possible, but not everyone with genetic predisposition develops symptoms. Sometimes it's subtle or it goes unnoticed. Inheritance of JME can get pretty complicated. For example, when there's a mutation in the GABA1 gene, essentially what this gene does is it prevents your brain from becoming overloaded with signals. When there's a mutation in this, it is inherited in autosomal dominant fashion, which essentially just means one copy of the mutated gene from either parent can cause the condition. But JME is considered to have preferential maternal transmission, meaning that if your mother were to have JME, she's more likely to pass it down to you, in comparison to if your dad had it.
Can you go more into detail about the genetic aspects of JME?
Of course, I mentioned earlier how it could be, caused by a mutation in the GABA1 gene. GABA receptors lag gated ion channels that allow chloride ions to pass into cells, which reduces neuronal excitability. They play a role in regulating motion, cognition, pain, sleep, and motor function. To put it simply, it helps calm down, the electrical activity in the brain. Think of it as like a brake that keeps your brain's neurons from firing too much. And the GABA receptor is where GABA binds to regulate the activity. When the GABA1 gene is mutated, the GABA receptor doesn't work as well. It's like the brain's brake system becomes less effective. This contributes to seizures we see in JME, so I'm sure you wonder how this could even happen. So mutations can occur during the formation of egg or sperm cells, or they can be inherited from a parent. JME caused by GABA1 gene mutation is often inherited in a autosomal dominant pattern, but not everyone with the mutation develops symptoms. In regards to preferential maternal transmission, we don't fully understand all the reasons as to why it is more likely passed through the mother, but it could relate to differences in how genetic material is expressed, depending on whether it comes from the mother or the father. Some researchers also think environmental factors during pregnancy might play a role. But for now, the important thing is managing symptoms. I'd like to start you on a medication called levetiracetam, or Keppra, to make it easier to pronounce. It's also its like brand name. 500 milligram tabs twice a day. It'll stabilize the electrical activity in your brain, reducing the likelihood of a seizure. It works by binding to a specific protein in the brain called synaptic vesicle protein 2A, or SV2A for short. It modifies how neurons release neurotransmitters, helping prevent the abnormal electrical activity that leads to seizures. In the meantime, I would recommend staying away from like pools or like large bodies of water, or really participating in any activity that would put you in danger if a seizure were to occur. And this is just, in the meantime, while your medication, really kicks in, it's just to prevent any, anything from happening.